So you ended up being named creative director for the campaign, right? For the election campaign?
Yeah, yeah, and that was a lot of fun too. That there was a lot of cool stuff that we were able to do on the campaign that I credit directly to Tom's leadership of the campaign and to the we used to call him the leader, I guess, to Justin Trudeau himself, who was willing to try stuff. Who was willing to show up and stand on the X, so to speak. And have a good time with the things we were trying to do, so long as we weren't making him appear to be unserious. So, for example, there was, he was a boxer that was well known, and he would do these boxing, training sessions. Sometimes they'd be a photo op, sometimes not. But before the first debate of the 2015 campaign, we went to go film. He did a boxing photo op, so we went to go shoot him, do that, and then we got to do this like little voiceover about how he wasn't the typical politician who was just going to jog for a photo op. He's going to box. Trying to convey the image that here's a new guy, a youthful guy who's not afraid to mix it up a little bit. And by the way, who actually boxes, as you know.
Okay. And I'm curious, did you know once the election was coming that you would eventually get the creative director? Like, was that a natural progression, or did that kind of come as a surprise?
No, I mean, I don't know if it was necessarily a surprise. I assumed that I would still have a say in how the social would get done. But when an election comes around, it's a really, really good lesson in teamwork, because whereas before we were doing stuff with 4 or 5 people on the digital team of the Liberal Party, all of a sudden you've got 20, right? Like the war room gets swollen with people, and it's a great thing. You just have to learn, like, okay, you are a cog in this particular machine, because we all have a collective goal to reach, which is getting the W on election day.
Okay. Is that overwhelming or a daunting task to face, to be the creative director for a national election?
No, because there were a lot of creative cooks in the pot, and I think that the senior folks who've been there much longer than me were able to take a lot off my plate. Of course, we had an ad agency, and that was doing a lot of that heavy lifting when it came to some of the TV ads you saw. But the other ones, I think you're right. Sometimes we'd be shooting, producing something, and we're like, "Is this it? Am I going to put this out in the name of the leader of one of the major political parties? This thing that I watched the edit for, or that like I was holding the camera for, and that we edited on a plane on the way between Toronto and Ottawa." It was like there was some really, really surreal moments in politics where you're like, we're just sitting here in a room with the guy who just won the election. So like the day after he won, Trudeau comes by the Liberal Party offices to say, shake some hands, say thank you. And then we still had some videos to shoot that day, like our normal, holiday greetings, that kind of thing. And we're in the room all together. And I remember our videographer looks at him and goes, "So what do we call you now?" Like at the time we had just called him Justin. So it was like a weird adjustment that was us, just like with a Sony, camcorder. I mean, good Canon camcorder, but like that was just us doing the stuff. And then of course the social media revolution meant the tremendous democratization of media. Like you say, everyone in their phone is now on camera shooting, editing, cutting.
And talk to me about that. I did, again, my knowledge of this election came from Wikipedia. So if any of it's wrong, please let me know. This is the first election I voted in, which is another fun fact.
Oh, nice.
But it was an 11-week election, right?
Yeah.
11 week was the road to the election. Talk to me about the grind of that, because I'm assuming you're traveling to all the different rallies and things like that. And the closest thing that I can kind of relate to that is when I did 67's playoffs. It wasn't quite that long, but I was like on the bus driving to random small towns all over Ontario for like a 2-month period with not much rest. So I'm curious what that was like for you during the election.
Yeah. So I was actually based in the war room. So I only traveled like once or twice for election related things, if I'm not mistaken. One of them though, like I had this giant green screen like tarp. And I remember I had to like walk through Toronto dripping sweat. But most of the time I was in the war room. But that said, in a previous job at CTV when I was producing, I got to be the sort of like house producer on the Progressive Conservative bus in the 2007 Ontario election campaign. So all the news organizations pooled their money, and like I got to sit there as the producer on this bus. And that was 30 days from one town to another town in Ontario nonstop. And that was honestly, as tiring as it may have been, it was like the thrill of a lifetime. I love that stuff. It was fun to like be on tour, So all that said, I didn't really budge much during the campaign, but after we won, and after sort of we fell into a rhythm and I started working in the Prime Minister's office, then I got to go on more trips. And got to sort of be alongside as we traveled through Canada and got to go on some cool international trips where, that grind is intense, but obviously super thrilling and super fun. And, it was just like, there's nothing like it.
But bring me into that war room then during kind of if you're back in Ottawa, what's the process like when you have a team capturing content at different rallies? Is it coming back to you? Are they posting live from the event? Like, what does that look like? What's the review process like too? Because you mentioned how like you'll be sitting there and you're like, am I about to make a post for like a national political party? Is there like different layers of people it has to go through? And like, how does that impact trying to do coverage live? Like, what does that whole thing look like?
Yeah, I mean that was the crux of, I think, why we were able to have a little bit of success in the campaign on social, because we worked out our approval processes beforehand, and we made them as streamlined as possible. And I think, what we were driven by, there was a news story, if you look it up, about like Mitt Romney's 2012 election campaign that was haunting all of us, because there was some article that came out that was like, Mitt Romney's tweets or Mitt Romney's Facebook posts need to go through like 9 layers of approval, right? And we were all like, to hell with that. We are gonna get this as streamlined as possible right away. So is it a video script, and how quickly can you get it to Justin Trudeau to like look at it, approve it, move on, and so forth? If it's a tweet, a Facebook post, what are we doing to make sure that as many eyes as possible get on that, but in a way that, there's one set of eyes that says yes, no, and if anyone has a problem with it, speak now or forever hold your peace. So we were able to sort of have this system whereby, like footage would come in from the road or photos would get in from the road. Then everybody knew exactly what was expected of them when it came time to like getting the content out the door and getting it approved quickly. And so like I think that was, when we talk about the team effort on social media, hugely important. And when I talk to political social media managers to this day, that is always something that still takes a tremendous amount of foresight and thought for everyone, which is like, how can we get these approvals scaled down and streamlined so that they're not clogging up the whole works?
And so like what is obviously it's going to be case by case, but like what is the ideal scenario for that today? Like is it similar to what you guys did back then? Like what does that process for review look like? Like how do you streamline it for today?
Yeah. And I think the first thing you do is make sure that you got buy-in from all the higher ups, right? Like, so managing upwards, as a term that was taught to me when I got to the Liberal Party. So, you want to manage upwards, make sure that all the higher ups know what you're asking of them, how quickly you want to turn around. And that at the same time, if they give you feedback, ideally it'd be specific and actionable. And if they do that, then it's not up to me to like gum up the works and be like, no, can we really do this? Like I'm asking them for a quick response quickly and a million things they got to do during the day. So let's just get on the same page quickly and go. And so, I think that the idea that it's insurmountable is is maybe a little bit overwrought. Like it's always easy to get a quick approval process in place. But I think a lot of the challenges are in politics when you've got social media is, first of all, making sure your principles. So your member of parliament, your congressman, your senator, your prime minister, whatever, making sure you understand the boundaries that they want in the posts. How much, how many eyeballs do they want on the post or not? What do they trust you to post without them? And then what is the approval process within the office? Does the chief of staff have to weigh in? Does the director of communications always have to weigh in? Instagram stories was a big one, right? So on Instagram stories, we're like, look, if we've got to get approvals for stories, it doesn't work, right? Like this is a more spontaneous kind of way of communication when they first came out. When Snapchat first came out, we were like, look, we need to streamline this a lot. And to be honest, there was a lot of buy-in from leadership on that kind of stuff. And I always push people now, if they're having trouble getting buy-in from their DComs and from their chiefs, to just like PowerPoint your way out of the problem, which is make a PowerPoint that shows fun, spontaneous content. It goes up and does really, really well. And the more we add different layers of constipation to this post, it's going to be absolute trash and everything.
So I know it's been a few years, but if you could ballpark, like if you could estimate the total time from someone records that content to posting it, and then what kind of the total output for like a rally would be. I'm just curious from that perspective, because like working in sports, like the rally is the equivalent to the game day. So it's just like, what does that output look like?
That is a great question. So, rallies, we ended up falling into a pretty cool rhythm in that, we kind of knew what we would get out of each rally. And by the way, rally footage, when you put it up on political social media, isn't necessarily going to get a lot of, clicks or likes because it's expected. a beautifully done montage of the prime minister or the prime minister to be speaking at a rally is always great. But I always say like you can really kill yourself doing a beautiful 2 minute piece and montage, but it won't necessarily do as well as a picture of like a politician and their dog just chilling at home. Like that is the reality of the social media world we live in. People want to see a little bit more authentic moments. I'm dancing around your question. To come back to your question, it could be as fast as a couple of hours. There'd be those moments of zen where you'd be like, okay, we have our videographer at the rally. He's shot it beautifully. He's cut it beautifully, like in the van, and Matt Snowy was our first videographer. Daryl Dean was our first graphic designer. And sometimes Daryl would put like beautiful titles on the thing. And, we'd have it and we'd be ready for approval. And everyone would be sort of alert and waiting because we wanted this footage out. And it could go up anywhere between 2-3 hours to you're waiting. Not necessarily for any other reason than just this is a political operation and people are busy and it takes a while to get approval sometimes. So you could be waiting who knows how, right? But like I think everyone past a certain point understood, look, these are important things that we want to communicate to folks and we got to get it out. We got to get it out the door.
And so you mentioned earlier the day after the election. Bring me back to the day of the election. Wake up from when you go to bed. What is that day like?
Well, I'll tell you about the night we won. I remember we won, and I was in the war room, and the war room had emptied out for election night. People had gone to various different sort of polling locations across the country, or they were traveling with the PM at headquarters in Montreal. And so I was just sitting there, and the news came over first that we won. And it was just dead silence. And then, I was it a half an hour later, who knows, the idea that we had won a majority, we were just then it was just like it really sunk. You know what I mean? And then we went to a party and we had a nice party, and I remember hunched over my laptop tweeting from the party, thinking, okay, this is my life for the next little while. But the next day, it was a lot of business as usual, and PM I think went out to go do a photo op thanking people in the subway in his home riding, and then there was like an eerie transition period where folks went into the prime minister's office, went into the transition office, and just sort of were doing business, and there was nothing much happening. So I remember that time being a struggle sometimes to find transition content that was going to be interesting or sexy, as opposed to just like the PM sitting at a desk in like an empty room somewhere. And then eventually from the little party offices, you started to see like a bit of an exodus because people were getting hired to go work in the government. And then the time came for inauguration, and you may remember or may not remember the prime minister sort of like famous, because it's 2015 clip, that went very, very viral. And then from there, it was an absolute whirlwind. First couple of years, whirlwind, just nuts. The attention on him at that time was unbelievable.
And so, I mean, back to your point too, of when just going through the night when you realize you won and had a majority. I wrote the numbers down here again, courtesy of Wikipedia. So feel free to correct these if they're wrong.
I don't know these off by heart. Come on now.
Fair enough. But so it was because going into the Trudeau had 30, or the Liberal Party had 36 seats going into the election. So to go from that to a majority was just
it was bananas.
Yeah, I can only imagine how crazy that was, and just I know the grind of tweeting from parties. Like I have been there, so I understand. Obviously not. I've never tweeted from winning an election party, but tweeted at many parties in my life.
That's when you're on the road, when you're traveling, that's kind of just the way that it is. You are expected to sit down on the floor of an airport, or in my case, I would answer my question by saying in the floor of the security shack at I think it was a Toyota plant in Cambridge, Ontario, if I'm not wrong. And we had a video, and we didn't have a videographer who could make it out to that event. So I just literally shot it on my phone, and I'm sitting there editing it on the floor of the security shack on iMovie. And I'm like, look, I loved it. What am I going to say? I didn't love it. I loved it. It was fun. I felt like I was, doing something really, really adventurous. No matter how crappy sometimes the physical accommodations of working in politics can be.
How often did you find yourself in the background of someone else's content while you were trying to capture your own content?
All the freaking time. And let me tell you, my friends and my ex-colleagues at CTV News would send me screenshots of just the feed of me just sitting there like dopily walking around in the background or checking the mic before the event because their camera feeds would be on for a while. And, you try to be not in the shot. Staffers should not be in the shot if, one of the cardinal rules of political comms, but it happens, and I'd always hear from it from my colleagues at CPD. Funny you should bring that up.
So I saw a photo of you somewhere where you were in the background. So I was curious if that was a
Oh
struggle you had to
man,
go through.
that was with the Irish Prime Minister. That was, I mean, I think if that's the one you're talking about, there's so the Taoiseach, the Prime Minister of Ireland, is welcoming us in Dublin, and Prime Minister Trudeau's there, and they're sitting, face to face in the chairs, and it's like the photo op for the first 5 minutes of the meeting where they bring the media in, everyone's clickety clicketing, and then they kick everybody out. And there's just, I don't know why, you could see my head just sort of like right behind them, and I'm just there with my little camera phone taking a little picture for the socials. And that was probably one of the more notorious ones. I mean, I have them saved in a folder somewhere, like times where you just see like my big old head in the background behind the prime minister, usually squinting at my phone. Yeah, that's sometimes you're just working and you don't notice, and the journalist will holler at you to get the hell out of the shot, and you're like, oh, sorry, and you're just back there.